Begin our panel of directly impacted organizers who are building power through Clean Slate campaigns in their states. We have four really amazing speakers and organizers and leaders who are carrying out field operations, organizing strategies in several different states, who are going to talk to us about how they're using Clean Slate campaigns to build power in their communities. Often on these calls, we talk about policy and implementation and legislation, research. And when we take a step back from that, we know that at the Clean Slate Initiative, we have dual goals. We have the goal of passing automatic record expungement and sealing for people around the nation. We have a 50-state strategy. We also have the dual goal of building power in communities that are most directly impacted by incarceration, by arrest and convictions. And so what we wanted to do this month is to hear directly from folks who are running those power building campaigns, to learn about their strategies and tactics on the ground. And the hope for the audience is that you hear something that you might be able to apply in your state or your campaign, and that we can really start a conversation around expanding our organizing work at CSI. I also know that many of you work on Clean Slate, but you also work on other issues related to criminalization, to incarceration, to reentry, and that as you are running a Clean Slate campaign, you also have your eyes set on other goals. And so how are we using Clean Slate to win this fight and then the next? The format for today's panel is we have the four panelists who are spotlighted here, who have agreed to speak. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and then to really share on the prompt of how are you building power in your community through your Clean Slate campaign. And everyone will have a slightly different tact and prompt the way they talk about this work. But that is the big idea for this panel today. We carved out a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to invite panelists to speak for about 7 minutes each. And then we'll aim to have some Q&A depending on how we do with time. So feel free to drop questions in the chat. And at the end of the presentations, we hope to be able to engage in a little bit of back and forth about organizing strategies. Sound good to everyone? You're on mute, so I can't hear you. Sounds good. All right, so let's get started. We are going to start with Marlon Chamberlain from Illinois. Marlon is the founding executive director of the Illinois Coalition to End Permanent Punishments and is co-leading the Clean Slate Illinois campaign, which is in its legislative stage. So we have speakers today, both from legislative states and implementation states that we're going to hear from. And we will start with Marlon to share about how you're building power, what your field operations this summer have looked like. Take it away.
Yep. Thank you, Caitlin, and good afternoon, everyone. This is, I believe, year 3 for us in terms of our Clean Slate campaign work. Unfortunately, in a state that is triple blue, we've just had a hard time getting Clean Slate across the finish line, but this year we are close. But as Caitlin mentioned, we're also using the Clean Slate campaign to really build out an infrastructure here in Illinois in terms of like just thinking about like work down the line. And what I mean by an infrastructure, we've separated the state into 4 different regions, a northern, we sort of singled out Cook County as being a region itself, and then central and southern Illinois. And the goal is within those 4 regions is a couple goals. We want to also have 12 sub-regions that would have chapter leaders that are counties that have developed chapters that where a lot of the learning, skill building, and campaign work would happen just from a local level, but also be connected to like the statewide table. And so the goals for us is to build over 3 years, is to build out 25 chapters across the state. We also want to, and there are 102 counties in Illinois, and we're hoping to have 2 ambassadors in each county throughout Illinois that is a local representative of our organization. And so ultimately, like the long-term strategy for us is really building out this sort of statewide but local strategy where we're identifying people locally. We're hoping to develop leaders locally so that they can develop relationships with their elected officials and help us not only move clean slate legislation across the finish line, but also thinking about future legislation. One of the things that our organization did was a research project where we scrubbed every statute currently in code in Illinois that creates a permanent punishment. And so the goal for us is to create pathways for everyone. So no matter what your conviction is, everybody has a pathway. Now, your pathway may look different depending on your conviction, but what we want to do is to create pathways for everyone to be completely free at some point. And Clean Slate fits into our strategy because it's given us an opportunity to really do some power building, some base building, and just some metrics that I'll sort of close with that we wanted to see by the end of the year. When we started our campaign work at the beginning of the summer, I think we had 2,000 people listed as sort of like supporters of our campaign of our Clean Slate initiative. And so a goal for us was to increase that number to 5,000. We also wanted to develop 3 chapters between June 1st and the end of the year. We wanted to develop chapters. All 3 of those chapters are in the works. One is actually, it's an active chapter now. But that was one of the goals that we set. And then also we set some goals to get our folks trained on the ground, which we have Elena, who's not on the call, but Amanda knows well, and Susan Mason that's coming into town on the 15th and 16th to really train our folks on how to advocate in the General Assembly. So that is our like base building strategy and how we've leveraged the Clean Slate work. And I will toss it back to Caitlin.
Everyone is very snappy today. Thank you, Marlon. Because you have about 3 more minutes, I'm going to ask you a couple of follow-up questions. I'm wondering, Marlon, if you can share 2 things. One, can you share about staffing at NPP and who you hire and why you hire them? And can you share also about the ladder of engagement? So what I mean by that is you meet someone, maybe they have a record, they're directly impacted by records or record clearance.
Mm-hmm.
They're interested in getting involved. How do you lift them up into more leadership? And I just accidentally muted Marlon instead of myself.
No, it's okay. To answer the first question, the Illinois Coalition to End Permanent Punishments is still a new organization. It was founded in May of 2022. So right now we have 7 people on staff. All 7 individuals are individuals with an arrest or conviction record, and our goal is to continue centering people with lived experience to lead this work from a staff and governing board perspective. In regards to your follow-up question, from the time that we meet an individual on the streets that express interest, what we try to do is we have sort of like many ways to test this individuals in terms of their level of engagement, in terms of their leadership. So what we look at first is, do they show up for coalition calls? Have they showed up for several different events? Have they been down to Springfield? And between all of these particular steps, we have like leadership opportunities where we host a plethora of trainings, whether it's our 3-day community training, whether it's a policy training, whether it's a half-day community organizing training that we try to engage to make sure that not only are our folks engaging in the work, but that they're being trained and they have the skills and the know-how so that we can navigate the political environment, we can navigate on the ground from a community organizing perspective, that they know how to talk about the issue. So at every level of engagement, there's opportunities also for development and learning. And that's something that is huge for us because we believe that it's important for us to have the skills, to have the agency to really lead this work. And it's not excluding anybody because we will work with anyone, but our focus is really centering the leadership and decision-making of those with the arrest and conviction records.
Marlon, thank you so much. All right, terrific. We are going to shift to Kaylee Griffey. Kaylee is the co-founder and co-executive director of Until We Are All Free in Minnesota. They passed Clean Slate and are working on an implementation campaign, and their implementation campaign looks a little bit different than I see in other states. And would love to hear, Kaylee, from your perspective, how are you building power? And if you get to it, kind of tell us a little bit about how you're doing notification, what the tech tools and lists you're using to notify people, what that looks like. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Kaylee, representing Minnesota. Co-founder, co-executive director of Until We're All Free movement, which is exclusively founded and run by justice impacted individuals. To answer that question, I will just say, since we're in implementation, it's a really exciting thing to hold because essentially we're using CSI as a means of building trust in democracy as it relates to this election. The CSI getting passed didn't just happen overnight. It happened because of individuals coming together and deciding that it's important enough to push it across the finish line. And so, there's a lot of people, especially after, post George Floyd, who they're really tired of democracy. They're tired of politics. It never trickles down to them. They still don't have a place to live. They still don't have a place to work. And they're living in survivor mode. And so this is a great opportunity for us to essentially come with good news that's like as tangible as anything that they've gone through.
You've been muted, Kaylee, but I don't know why.
Was I muted the whole time?
Nope, no, we heard everything you said until this moment.
Okay. But for us, one of the things, and I think when we do these big initiatives and stuff, and we're collecting data and surveys, the lower end of the community can feel like they're being extracted from constantly. Like they're always being used for data, for surveys. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? But very, very little is given back to them in the terms of like a tangible thing that will impact their life. And so for us, it's been so great to like not have to take anything from anybody or ask anything from anyone, but rather like traveling around our state. We're doing expungement clinics around our state, but like bringing news that doesn't require us to ask anything from them or extract anything. We do have a survey that we, are asking people to fill out just if they want to, simply about how it's impacting their life, because we would like to be able to expand it later. I think the importance of Clean Slate is that it impacts everybody. It's not just like those who've been to prison and the typical, justice impacted population. Like this really is going to cover like parents who can't volunteer, with their child's school. And so those are the kind of stories that as we're going across the state that we're collecting and we want to hear about is like more than just the typical thing, because we have hopes that we'll be able to expand it. A lot of the people that we interact with seem to find that a couple of their things meet Clean Slate, but other things don't. And so we hope to use, this survey data to eventually get it expanded. And so, there's just something, like I said, it's really, really powerful when you can go into communities and not ask them to do anything, but rather you don't have to do anything, but here's this thing that's going to impact your life significantly. And another, way in which we're still I'm still waiting on the lists and stuff, but some of us even on this call are involved with a larger organization that works with specifically formerly incarcerated people and getting them involved in our democracy, especially in terms of like voter engagement. But through that access, there's technology that can do texting, phone calls, and put those lists into like really easy ways to reach a lot of people really, really fast. And so I know we're using them right now for voter engagement, but I don't see why we can't apply this for Clean Slate updates. I know I get a ton of text messages, political text messages on a daily basis right now, but how nice would it be if one of those text messages actually had information that actually applied to my life that I didn't know about? And so one of the things that we're looking into right now is using, the texting platform to reach people, to let them know, like, here's where you can find the information on it. This is, like, lay it out for people so that we can reach the people who we're not meeting in person. Yeah, and I think that's what I got so far, unless you have any follow-up questions, Caitlin.
Haley, thank you so much. And just so folks know, Clean Slate Minnesota is supposed to go into effect January 2025. Am I right about that?
Yes, the first.
All right, so we all have our eyes on Minnesota and how notification is going to happen. We all understand that the impact of Clean Slate is really limited if people don't know that their records have been cleared. And so Minnesota is really grappling with how do we get the word out to communities to make sure people understand, are they eligible? Will it be cleared? Was it cleared? And that's the great work that Kaylee's doing. And then we're going to stay here in Minnesota for another few minutes and turn the mic over to Brian Fullman. Brian is the lead organizer with Barbershops and Black Congregations Cooperative with Isaiah, Faith in Minnesota, comes with many titles, and is going to share a little bit about the work that you're doing. How are you catalyzing engagement in public life among directly impacted folks through your work on Clean Slate?
Yes, thank you, Caitlin. Thank you to everybody for having us. This is really important work. And anytime I get an opportunity to amplify how we're actually implementing and connecting with our community, I'm all for it. I'm a grassroots organizer. I created the Barbershop and Black Congregation Cooperative because I understood that both the barbershops and the church were institutions that Black people were accountable to, that they would come to consistently, and I would have a good shot at actually creating protagonists of their own stories and then actually teaching people how to actually lead in community. We are about the business of actually inviting people to agency and then building those relationships to be leveraged in the political and public arena for the things that we want. In a lot of ways, this is the only pathway for a community of people who do not have a lot of resources to be able to build community power and actually stand against a lot of the Pacific legislators who want to see us divided, who want to see us walking past each other, who don't want us to talk to each other, who do want to judge us for being formally incarcerated. So Clean Slate Initiative is at the core of my self-interest because it's good news. It's good news. And as a grassroots organizer, the first thing we want to do is we want to have good news to meet people where they're at. And because my organization, Isaiah, is not a direct service agency, anytime we can have information to deliver to our people that will immediately affect them as early as 2025, I jumped on it. So there's 3 containers that we're actually organizing out of. And just let me stop real quick, just to let you understand the process before I go into the containers. The process is to go out in the streets, introduce myself to people, let them understand what I do, ask them to have a one-to-one, and then start to identify what they're passionate about. What are the things that shake and rattle and roll their guts? And if I have some good news and some good resources, it actually makes them a lot more receptive to the proposition that I have for them. So then I actually invite them to come have a sit down. Let's talk as a group about the things that are bothering us, that are plaguing us, the things that keep us marginalized and disenfranchised. As we continue to have those conversations, I start to connect the dots of their self-interest and their passions to the work that I'm doing. So I'm not leading a Clean Slate Initiative campaign. I'm just showing up with Clean Slate materials and conversations in everything I do. So the voter engagement program that I'm running right now, I'm not doing no more transactional voter engagement programs. I'm not doing no more 5-minute conversations on the doors without first tenderizing the soil. So we're doing a barbershop tour right now, specifically in North Side, Minneapolis. We've started that tour. We've done one barbershop house meeting. We have our second one on the 12th. And an example of how I'm actually bringing up Clean Slate is that because the numbers are so disproportionate as far as Black people being locked up in the state, I mean, it affects all of us, but I'm now talking from the context of being an organizer who directly organizes both West African, African Americans. The numbers are ridiculous. So it's unfortunately, it is common dynamic in Black families to have somebody who was formerly incarcerated or somebody who's on probation or parole. So you don't actually have to go searching for people who are actually on probation or for people who are formerly incarcerated. All you have to do is engage the community and they'll take the information home. So on the 12th, I'll be at Hands On Barber and Beauty. We're going to have a 3-hour sit down. Part of that is discussing all of the new gifts that BBCC has. And so one of those gifts is explaining what Clean Slate is, because it actually allows people to start planning their lives. So if I can actually give somebody information like that, then it won't be nothing for me now to talk about the youth programming campaign that I'm co-leading right now. So as we talk about the investment in our children, it's directly connected to people having a shot to create the proper and productive conditions for their children to be raised in. And people having a clean record of being able to go rent them something that's decent or be able to get that job that they're wanting is directly connected to this work. So we're doing a barbershop tour where Clean Slate is always going to be mentioned. There's going to be flyers that is given out. We have QR codes that people can look up right then and there if they're eligible for this program. We did a daytime, I call it a Black Top Day event at the church that I actually shared some pictures with you all, Kaylee, for Until We Are Free. I shared pictures with Kevin Reese and Antonio Williams about the work that we were doing with formerly incarcerated brothers who showed up that event. I didn't target them out. They was just formerly incarcerated. And one of the brothers, Brother Eli, goes to my church. He just got out last year. So he was super excited because he hadn't even heard of Clean Slate. So that just gives you an example of if you're entrenched in community, trust me, you're going to hit the targets that you need to hit. And this is the way we're actually implementing it. Another way that we're implementing it, I do survey Sundays at my church. So I organize both the barbershops and congregations. Right now, me and my co-executive director, Janae Bates, are in the middle of coordinating a multiple Black church souls to the polls. Well, what do you think one of the materials I'm going to have? Because earlier on the 12th, I'm actually facilitating the door knock at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. So when I get through training them on how to door knock, one of the pieces of material, along with will you actually go vote, is do you know about Clean Slate Initiative? So we got 5 turfs with 100 residents on each turf. We are looking to potentially reach close to 300 to 400 people, and we want to make sure that they have this information. Another way that we're doing it, we have a prison ministry inside of our churches. So I just got through propositioning Brother Eli Simmons, who I just talked about, who is in the men's ministry. I developed a social justice ministry inside of High Praise Ministry Church in North Minneapolis. Guess what we're going to do with the prison ministry? They're going to be the ones that actually introduce the Clean Slate Initiative to the church. So I'm actually doing multiple things at the same time. I'm exposing the information about Clean Slate Initiative. I'm developing leaders at the same time. We're developing protagonists around their own story, but more importantly, we're sparking the imagination of the people who are directly impacted. So, because the fight is not over yet. We want to make sure that every felony is on that list. We want to make sure that 100% misdemeanors are on that list. So yes, Minnesota's done some great work, and thank God we've passed this, but we cannot become complacent with that. We have to build a multiracial movement when we have an opportunity with good information like this. So my understanding about this information is, yes, people do not, it's great to just be able to give people information and not have to ask them for anything, but it actually makes my conversation a little bit more meaningful because I am somebody who is asking. I'm asking what your name is, what your contact information is, what's your email, because I actually want to revisit you, do a one-to-one, and then invite you to agency. And I think these kind of policies help us as organizers because we can actually show them that when you do collective work, resources and equity get delivered to you. It's proof in the pudding. So we're going to continue to do this work. The barbershop tour is going on to until elections. Our multiple action souls to the polls in 5 different Black churches is going on. Clean Slate Initiative will be on those tables when we're doing our table drives and our pledge drives, and the prison ministry will continue to grow, because if they got something to talk about, you better believe other formerly incarcerated want to know what is that they're doing, what is the momentum and drive that they have in that church, and hopefully we can expand when we get good information and good policies like this.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. I feel personally organized. So, ready to do whatever y'all need in Minnesota and Illinois. We're going to turn our attention now to Amanda Hall. Amanda is calling in today from Eastern Kentucky. She's the Senior Director of National Campaigns at dream.org, works nationally, but also works in states, including on the Clean Slate Kentucky campaign. So the same question, Amanda, goes to you, which is how are you building power in your communities through Clean Slate? But I also am interested in getting into a little bit of the nuance and practice of this work, hearing from you about how you're ensuring directly impacted people are really centrally involved in decision making, how you're preventing the potential exploitation of directly impacted folks in your work, and how you navigate gatekeeping. Would love to hear a little bit about what you think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin. And I just wanted to thank the folks on this panel before me. I am not worthy. What like a powerful group. So I just appreciate you all sharing so much of the great work that you're doing. But yeah, so I'm Amanda Hall. I'm from out in Eastern Kentucky, out in Appalachia. I work at dream.org. As the Senior Director of our national campaigns, as Caitlin mentioned, on state and federal issues. So when I think of directly impacted folks and what ways they should be involved, I think always. Like we have common backgrounds of incarceration or going through the system, but then we're all very different and our interests are different and the ways that we want to engage. So when you're working on campaigns, I like really push for you to look at, no matter what component you're working on, is how do we make sure that this door is open for directly impacted folks? So that can be lobbying, that can be field organizing, that can be communications, any aspect of that campaign. And also when you're inviting folks in, like quit with the jargon, especially if it's brand new people. I remember when I first started, I didn't even know what a campaign was. I knew like a campaign to get folks elected, but it's really important to break that down. And I don't think it's because, that we are not smart enough to learn. I truly believe that we have been intentionally locked out of that. I think we have intentionally not been taught. So please, when you're bringing folks in, make sure to educate, make sure for the space to feel welcomed. All the jargon, please y'all cut it back. I know it's easy for us, especially the acronyms that we all love and worship. But just be very cognizant of that. At Dream, it's really important for us. Any campaign that we're working on, our whole justice team is formerly incarcerated, myself included. So when we work on federal legislation and campaigns, we have a federal advisory group. We do not support nor do we oppose legislation without that group, without their input, without their feedback, without them pushing us like, here's where we should try to make it better, and have those really intentional conversations. We always try our best to provide monetary to stipend folks when we have it, to really show them that their time is very important to us. We also look at things, like I mentioned earlier, when it comes to education. We're really lucky and are able to provide a lot of trainings. We have a large cohort to put people through to teach them all the ins and outs of a campaign, how to lobby, how to make a campaign plan, how communication plans are weaving. What does your state legislature, how does it work? Like really getting in the weeds. This is how it works. Here's how you get a bill passed. We also, when we look at partnerships and grants, we look at like in-kind donations, like working with Coursera? Like, can our leaders get some educational courses? And thank goodness they said yes. So now our leaders, as I think everyone before me said, we can't just be extractive. We can't just ask, what can you give us? So how can we provide these resources? Also, I try not to be a gatekeeper and decide what people's capacity is. I try not to say, I'm not going to ask them to tell their story because I don't want to exploit them, because I also want to give people agency. Myself and a lot of people have went through the worst things in our life, and we get our power back by telling our story, for fighting for a better change. So I don't want to lock people out of that. But I also, if they are going through and unveiling their trauma, we offer resources. So keep that in mind too. Like, this is hard work, period. But imagine if you were it was that personalized, that you're literally telling some of the darkest moments of your life. Like, offer that. Like, we work with BetterHelp to make sure that our advocates, if it's too much for them or they need, that's a different entity completely, we don't know about it, but we say, here's this resource. Like, we're all formerly incarcerated. We know this can suck sometimes, and it can hurt, and it's painful. So we have this if you need that. When you're going to these legislative meetings, even if it's your president of the Senate, invite your directly impacted people. Don't look at a room and say, oh, only certain folks should be in that room. No, like, we should and can be in all rooms. We are an asset, and we're gonna know probably if you don't want us there. So even if you're not used to organizing with directly impacted folks, that's okay. Like, take time to educate yourself, to be in community with us. Like I think everyone said before me too, I won't put on anybody else, but I love to work with folks that have never been incarcerated. I love to work with the fancy lawyers, and I love working with the really smart comms people. Like, I love that. We want to work in that coalition. We want to have those unlikely allies. So I want to make sure that nothing I say is discouraging from that, because we really want that community. I'm willing to work with anybody that will help me free the people that I love and left behind, or make their lives better going forward. Also do things, I'm going to say like the quiet part out loud, but most of us are nonprofits. Most of us are in the donor space. Connect your directly impacted leaders with smaller organizations to donors. You know what I mean? Like, that's a real way to be an ally, and to show them how much you care about their work and support them. Lift them up on your platforms. Like I said, make sure that you have very clear approval from them. Also, give people the chance to opt out. I remember one time I told my story, and years later, this org kept using it without my permission, and it really was harming me. So sorry, that's all jumbled, but I could keep going. But those are like some really good tips. And like I said, every part of the decision-making process, make sure people are there. If you have to take an extra second to explain the policy, do it, because you should be helping build leaders. We look around the country, we've had some great policies passed in states all around the United States, but you know what else we're seeing? They're getting rolled back. We need to be building armies and folks that know how to do this work. So take that second. If you have this knowledge, if you have that degree, like, take that second and pass that knowledge down. That's very important.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Such helpful kind of tactics and how people think about this work and how people do this work. So we have some time for Q&A. So first off, just if people can drop in the chat their thanks for the panelists, give them some love. And then what I want to do first is open up to questions for the panel itself. So hear from folks on the panel, questions for each other to engage in a little peer exchange. And then we'll open it up to you all for your questions. And I think the best way to do this is probably to either you can drop a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll bring you off mute in a few minutes. And Marlon, I'm curious if you might be able to kick things off with a question for the panel.
Yep, absolutely. So as I listened to each of you, I heard how we should center people with lived experience in this work. And so my question is like where does that come from for you all as individuals? Like why is that important to you and your organizations?
We know the solutions. Those closest to the pain are closest to the solution, closest to the power. And so, and I just feel like we're the best people to work with our people. You know, so I know that that's for me is that when things are led by people who don't have the lived experience, things get really integral pieces get missed. Even something as small as like having people share their story, understanding that that's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of trauma in that. And who's monetizing off of that story? Because if it's not the person that experienced it, I have there's a problem with that. Because everything is just like, we become in a culture of like trauma pimping. So it's like, it's our job to make sure that our people are properly compensated, that they're not being watered down, that they're not being extracted or exploited by anybody. And we're the only ones that have the eyes for that typically, because it's so easy to miss.
I second that, Kaylee. I think too, the reason why we want to do this, or where does that come from? There's no prerequisite to build power. It's just your willingness and your self-interest that drives you to make a decision. Do you want a public life, and do you want to actually operate collectively with others to get the resources you need for your community? So I think at the core of the reason why I'm like that is because I had an epiphany almost 10 years ago. See, I thought that you had to be something other than me to be able to build power and create change. I thought you had to be everything but me. When I realized you could be me, and then I started to really think about the other me's that were out there, then it actually it sparked a lifelong motivation and drive to make sure that people who are directly impacted by the systems that amongst thousands of us across the country trying to dismantle should be at the core of the decisions that are being made, because that's the sustainable base. That's the base who clearly understands why they're actually doing this work, and they have something to remind them of why they should always be doing this work. All they have to do is think about their own lives. So that's what drives me to continue doing this work. That's why I'm so passionate about the work, because they should have never let me find out that all you had to do was have a will and breath in your body to build the necessary power for change.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I echo everything that you all said. And I remember the day that I left prison, they said, don't look back because it's bad luck. And I could not look back, because I thought that day in that transport van, I'm not going to forget you all. Like, I'm not going to do it. So literally, it's just felt like a purpose. I even tried to leave this space and came back because I'm like, that's my purpose, and I want to do this with my people. And yeah, I just don't know if there's anything else I can do. I tried it and came right on back.
Thank you, everyone. Kaylee, Brian, or Amanda, do you have a question for the panel? And then we'll open up to the rest of folks. Feel free to unmute yourselves.
This is definitely a purpose for me too. And I think for all of us that are, on this call. I guess I'm curious to hear from everyone else how you find opportunities to engage people who this isn't their calling. This isn't like they support it all, but they might not have the skills, it might not be their thing to be an organizer. So I guess I'm just curious to hear about ways that you guys engage people that are on the outer layers. That makes sense.
Well, I kick it off. So for us, going back to I think the question that Caitlin asked is like there are different levels for different people, and to your point, like I've met or I'm in relationship with a lot of people that I've served time with that are like, Marlon, I love what you do, but that's not for me. I'm not going to Springfield. I'm not showing up to any meetings. But what they will do sometimes is share the information on Facebook or social media, or they'll share information with their internal families or folks. And so and sometimes in those occasions, I ask them, like, what are you willing to do? And even if it's nothing, but just saying I support you, they're still my friend. And I still check in with them just from time to time to let them know, like at any given moment, if they change their mind, that there's a role that they can play. So I think it just depends on the relationship. But I'm big on saying that there is room and a role for everyone in this movement. Like if you bake cookies, you can bake cookies for the movement. Like there's roles that everyone can play, and that's not to minimize those roles because every role is important.
Yeah, 100%. And I remember I had one friend, like legislative meetings was not her thing. I get it. It's not mine every day and some other parts. But this person ended up with their own catering company. So literally I would hire them to cater the meat, like however, like Marlon said, and I think Brian was so great about those one-on-ones, like get to know the folks you're organizing with, tap into their strengths, like let them know they're part of community. So yeah.
All right, terrific. Thank you. All right, we are now going to open up to the rest of the folks on this call. We have about 40 folks who have joined us for most of this call. And if folks want to come off mute or raise hands, that would be great. I see lots of love in the chat, and feel free to raise your hand if you have a question that you want to ask the panelists. And while we are waiting on folks to jump in here, and don't be shy, I'm curious to hear how you all, well, actually, we have a question that just came in from Leslie. Okay, great. Leslie asks, is it difficult to get folks with lived experience to engage? How do you motivate them? I'll pass that to the panel, whoever wants to go first.
It is. And I want to be very clear. It is. People who are re-entering society immediately, people who have been re-entered society 10 years ago, there's different stakes, especially for people who are just getting out. And a lot of the times you do have to meet people where they at. So as an organizer, you do have to hone the skill set, the craft of knowing how much to proposition and enroll people in, and then how do you actually see people for where they at and respect the fact that there's some immediate resources that they may need. So it's hard to answer that question with a sweeping answer as an organizer. The thing that we have to do is to listen and be agentic. And so not actually coming in with your own agenda and your own direction for people, but actually offering them to cook up with you, to have those discussions, to see what it is that they may need. Part of one of the meat of an organizer is to listen, connect these self-interests, and then try to connect them with organizations that do have direct services so people can get the things that they need. But it is very difficult. And the only thing you have to do in that is to master your own leadership in yourself. Because it might not happen now, but if you preserve the relationship, you can always circle back when things actually start to smooth out. And again, Clean Slate Initiative is that kind of news where people see that you value them and you see them. That's why those are the kind of tools that really open up the conversations for us as organizers to be able to on-ramp people. So yes, it's very difficult. The way we actually get people in this room is to spend time with them, to have those conversations with them, but be clear about what it is, what your intention is. Because the one thing I do know about people who are just as impacted, they can smell the bull crap on you. So if you're trying to sell them something, if you're trying to persuade them into something versus actually being very transparent about what your agenda is and also having an imagination about the power that they can build with you, if you're not clear about those things, they will smell it on you and they don't want to deal with you. So I'll just leave it there because I know there's other perspectives and opinions on this.
And I would just say for me, like, I've been building all of my relationships for years. And the way that I motivate people is literally based in that relationship. When you have relationships that are ongoing with people that are rooted in support, when you actually need people for something, they're more willing to come. Because, like if I've sent, commissary money to somebody over years and they get out and I ask them, could you please come to this for me? They're gonna be more likely to come because it's relationship based. And so I don't, relationship organizing is such key to getting the people around you to respond. And I think for me, it always starts with like showing unapologetic support for people, that isn't rooted in my own self-interest. And that's how I can, start to build trust with people so that they know I'm not on any bullshit, that this is all like real stuff. I really, really care. And so I know that that's how I do it.
All right, terrific. Well, we are just about at time. I want to take a minute to thank the panelists. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing your work and your wisdom and your perspective with the Clean Slate Initiative State Partners. This was a really exciting panel. We, I imagine, are going to be doing more panels like this in the future. What I want to ask of the participants who are still with us in this call is, at the beginning, I asked you for a one-word mood check on how you were joining this call. I'd like to ask the same thing for you to say one-word mood on how you are leaving this call today after hearing the panel. I see inspired, empowered, excited and motivated, hopeful and grateful. Wonderful. Ready to go. Love it. Well, thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to everyone who's joined this call. We will see you next month on the second Tuesday at 2:00 for the next State Partners call. And we really appreciate the work you all doing in your states, and take care until next time. Thanks, everyone.